I'm Dave Dickinson. I started Bankers Compliance Consulting in 1993. Bankers Compliance Consulting is a company that takes complicated regs and turns them into plain English. And we do that through a variety of methods. Some is through training. We wade through hundreds of pages of complicated regs and we boil them down into simple to understand concepts. Second, we go in and do consulting. We like to be partnering with the bank. Bankers Consulting serves financial institutions, no matter who they're regulated by. I've always had a heart for coaching. I guess we'd call that consulting now. But when I was with the FDIC, for instance, I had an 11-page matrix that was given to me to use. And it was an ineffective tool because no one would want to wade through 11 pages to find it. And I boiled down the most common things into one page. My boss actually wouldn't let me hand that out. But I took that mentality of trying to make things simple. Bankers Consulting is a valuable asset to the banking industry because we're not this big glossy tower. We're not into big time contracts. We're in a handshake is good enough. We're going to partner with you. We've got super and talented rocket scientist people on this team that know what it's like to be on the other side of the desk and know what it's like when a new reg comes out, how complicated and chaotic that can be. One of the greatest compliments we get, usually following our seminars and webinars, is that people are inspired to go back to work. We don't want to just give them information. We want to motivate them so that they can more easily do what they do best. We back up our contracts with a complete delight guarantee that says if you're not absolutely delighted, you pay us nothing or pay us what you think it's worth. We want to have relationships because I feel like it's about people and it's not just business. And that has really been a driving force of this company since the foundation of it.
I was started with the Bankers Compliance Consulting firm when Dave first started back in the early 90s. And I liked his method and his style of teachings. I started with him and I've been going ever since.
When the bank hired me in 2010, I had no banking experience. They couldn't have been better for me. They pretty much took me under their wing and helped me along, and I am here today, 8 years later, still working the job and doing a pretty good job, I think.
We got connected with BCC when we were having a lot of compliance trouble, and they helped us navigate some fairly significant issues that we were having as far as setting up, knowing what to do and how to get there.
There are so many great things about the seminars, but I think my favorite thing is really talking to the experts, getting to know them and see their faces and having that connection.
Dave Dickinson and I know each other by first name, and to me that's important.
I first encountered BCC really early in my compliance career, and it's really hard to say if I would have stayed in compliance or if I would have the passion for it that I have now if I hadn't encountered them so early on.
My success, I guess I can credit to Bankers Compliance. With their help and their expertise, I received 1 ratings for our compliance exams, and so I credit that all to them.
We've been made more successful on the compliance side of our bank by working with BCC because they've given us a comprehensive plan of getting our challenges resolved. They told us what we needed to do, how we needed to do it, and why we needed to do it.
There's a lot of reasons to recommend BCC, and it really depends on what their needs are. For me, the seminars are just so valuable. You really get a lot of bang for your buck, and you can take someone who really has only a cursory knowledge or cursory understanding of compliance and really elevate them in a really short amount of time.
I'd recommend them because they're professionals. They provide a service that is really needed in this industry.
Video about what we do, where we come from, who we are, what we're all about. You're in the right place if you're looking for the Compliance Forum. I have that we are actually at the top of the hour, so let me do this. I'm going to formally welcome everybody into today's program. This is the 4th edition of our Compliance Forum. This is a little bit different than the other 3 we do throughout the year. The other 3 are question and answer forums. This one is a look back at 2020 and a look ahead at what's off there up on the horizon. Hi there, my name is Jared Moyer, and I'm going to be the lead presenter for today's program, and I'm going to be helped out by one of my teammates today as well. I'm going to invite Diane Dean to come on in. She's going to play the role of moderator today, and here's how this thing's going to go. We're going to do a little bit of housekeeping here, and we're going to get right to it. We have a lot of ground to cover in the advertised 1-hour program that is this Compliance Forum. So let's do this. Let's make sure you have all the materials for today's program. If you don't have the outline, you're going to want to make sure you get that. That's where you're going to want to make sure that you're taking all those notes, because you're probably going to have a to-do list after today's program concludes. You can get that by navigating to the chat icon on the Zoom control panel. I'm going to put up a slide here. That's what it's going to look like. If you navigate there, your team will be able to click on the link that our team places there. You can download that 22-page outline so that you can take those notes and navigate the program with us as we go through it today. Now, while you're looking at that Zoom control panel, let me have you pay attention to one of the other buttons. There is a Q&A button. We are going to save about 10 minutes at the end of today's program to take some of your questions. Now, we're not going to get to all of them, but if you want your question to be considered to be part of the Q&A session, go ahead and get that submitted. Diane, my teammate there, she's going to be getting those, and she'll kind of weed through them and figure out which ones we're going to be able to get to in the time that we have with the program today. So we'll do that with about 10 minutes to go before the end of the program. We'll cut to Q&As and try to get you some plain English answers to some of those questions you may all have. Now, if you're having audio-visual technological issues like that, you can use our chat function there. We have our teammates standing by at our office to try to help you out with any of those things that you may encounter along the way. A reminder, this program today is being recorded, so if there's something that you need someone else on your team to hear, or maybe you just want to take this to your board and say, hey, here's what we've had to do for the last year, and here's where we're going next year, to give them a 10,000-foot view of what's been going on in compliance. Maybe that works for them. Maybe that's a level that they're able to take information, or maybe you use this to put your notes together for your next board meeting. So this is being recorded so you can go back and listen to it again and share that with those that maybe could not be here today during the program. I'll tell you more about that recording at the conclusion of today's adventure. Speaking of that adventure that we're going to go on, let me take you to the agenda for today's program. Our agenda, it looks like this. Simple. We're going to look back at 2020 and say, all right, what happened? Think of it as this is a checkpoint before the end of the year, to look back and say, all right, what did we miss? Did we capture everything that we were supposed to do and then do it? Did we follow through on that? Okay, suffice to say that there's probably things that you were not aware of, okay, or maybe you've forgotten that happened in 2020. Everybody knows COVID-19, the impact there, it's a huge one. But there were no major regulatory changes like TRID and HMDA that we've had in years past, but there was a lot of little things. I tell you what, we keep track of this throughout the year. That's how we build this outline. And when we were going back and preparing for today's program, it was an, oh my gosh, how do we do it all this year? And so maybe I want to start today with, before we can get into it, pat yourself on the back if you're still doing compliance right now, because you've had to deal with a lot of different information going in a lot of different directions this year, and very fast because of the world we're living in and how it's affected our industry. So we're going to look back at 2020, give you what happened, and you likely have some things that you'll put on the to-do list and make sure that you dot the I's and cross the T. We're also going to try to prepare you for what's up there on that horizon. And now with the election and everything that's coming, it's a little murky right now. We'll know better in a couple of weeks where things are going to go, but we have kind of an idea, at least from the CFPB's perspective, what they're looking at doing. And that's going to be the last quarter or so of our program today. In any event, you're going to be able to give a summary to your management teams, to your board, about where you've been, what you've done, what you have yet to do based on the year that we've had, and also some insight moving forward as we move through 2020 and off into 2021. And hopefully we'll be having a much better year in 2021 than what we've had this year. So with that, one more reminder as we get into the details here is we're going to be hitting, like I said, checkpoints, giving you some things to go back and look into. If you're looking for nuts and bolts, in the weeds training, that's not what today is. But if that's something you're hungry for, your teams are hungry for, we have a full menu to hopefully satisfy that hunger that may exist within your teams, within your organizations. If you check out our website or pick up the phone and give us a call, what we do is training. We try to take those complicated regulations, get into the weeds, the nuts and bolts, and get them back to you in a plain English setting. So if that's something you need, give us a call. We'd love to help partner with you and your organization to get you all going in the right direction. What I want to do is have you open up that outline and go to page number 1. You can go back and look through those ABC pages at your own leisure. There's not a lot there, a little bit of information about who we are, where we come from. There's a real estate matrix tool. If you were listening to that video earlier, you heard Dave talk about that. Let's get to what you came here for, and that is this look back and then ultimately the look ahead into 2020. Page number 1, we're going to start off with letter A. One of the first things that we were presented with this year is a statement from the CFPB regarding unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts or practices that UDAP acronym, specifically abusive. What they said here in letter A is that they are going to look first to unfair and deceptive and the criteria there before they try to frame up something as being abusive. The interesting thing about that, unfair and deceptive both have 3 sets of criteria that have to be present for it to meet the definition. Abusiveness under this framework doesn't have that. It has an either or, so the bar is lower. Okay, it's kind of interesting. Make sure your teams are aware of that. There's going to be more to come on that abusiveness standard. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this either. You need to kind of buckle up today. We've got a lot of things that we're going to cover. I'm not going to try to go super fast so you can't keep your attention and things like that. But I do want to make sure we touch on everything. This is being recorded. You may need to go back and listen to it again if you do happen to miss something. But I'll try to keep it at a pace where hopefully everybody can keep up here and take a few notes along the way. Letter B, let's talk about the lender credit. The CFPB put out some Q&As in February of this year to address all the confusion surrounding no cost and partial no cost loans, as well as lenders that absorb different fees and charges. You need to make sure you know whether you offer these products and then how they ultimately need to be disclosed. That's letter D. Letter B, make sure your TRID teams understand how these costs must be disclosed on the loan estimate and closing disclosure. I've done a lot of training on TRID in the last 6 months. This seems to be a surprise just about every time I bring it to a new bank's attention. Very bottom of the page. This is going to be a quick one. The Military Lending Act, okay, those that have oversight over it decided to rescind frequently asked question number 2 to the original form. Hey, what's that mean? It has to do with purchase money loans and money over and above the collateral being purchased. And so make sure that you're aware of this change, this amendment that came back in February of this year. Okay, there's not going to be much for details here. You probably are all very well aware of the COVID-19 impact, and there's going to be several references about it as we go through today's program. My note to you with letter D is this. Make sure you keep these links handy, somewhere saved. Here's why. 12, 18 months, 24 months down the road, when you go through an exam and they're taking things from this COVID-19 pandemic timeframe where there was supposed to be flexibility given to us through this guidance, you may have to show these guidance documents to auditors and examiners and say, we were supposed to have flexibility here, and they may or may not take it, but these are going to be important documents someday down the road. Letter E is a HMDA FAQ update. There's going to be a couple of these as we go through the program today. Letter E has to do with race, sex, and ethnicity collection and the questions that you have to answer in relation to the loan application register and whether or not the information was visually observed. And so that was kind of some outstanding gray area that we had within HMDA. This slammed the door for 2020 data as far as how you're supposed to move forward. The big thing there that they emphasized was consistency in your approach. The very bottom of the page, letter F, we have the CARES Act. The CARES Act brought a lot of things to the table, some of them compliance related. The ones that are compliance related specifically will be addressed through some of the other headlines as we move through this, but you need to make sure that you understood that first off, that law was passed. You probably did know that, but how did it impact your organization? Probably the biggest thing from a nuts and bolts reg standpoint is how you report to consumer reporting agencies in relationship to accommodation, workout, and those types of loans, loss mitigation loans. And there's another headline coming a little bit later where there's some guidance that was subsequently put out in relation to this CARES Act law that came out. Lots of other stuff there, but that's really the intersection with compliance. Obviously, PPP came with it as well, the Payroll Protection Program. Let's go to page number 3. Mortgage servicing. I'm actually going to do letter G and H as kind of a combined thing here because what happened in G is they put out a joint statement that said, hey, these mortgage servicing rules that exist in Reg Z, Truth in Lending, Reg X, RESPA, okay, we need to make sure that we're doing things to help people through this pandemic. And so they came out with this joint statement on COVID-19 impact and guidance with the mortgage servicing rules. And then at the same time, letter H, the CFPB put out the frequently asked questions. this is the better document. Obviously, the joint statement speaks for itself, but the frequently asked questions, if you are servicing mortgage loans of any kind, you need to make sure you're aware of this FAQ and what you're supposed to do with those workout, accommodation, and loss mitigation applications that you're receiving. Now, one of the misconceptions about letter G and H is that, well, I'm not a large servicer. Okay, the mortgage servicing rules, they have a bar, and they say if you're above this bar based on criteria, you're a large servicer. The misconception is this is just about large servicers, letter G and letter H. It's not entirely about large servicers. Yes, there are some things that are directly about large servicers, but as a small servicer, you need to make sure you're aware of the guidance as well. Letter I, a lot of attention went here. The PPP, Payroll Protection Program. This specifically is FinCEN's frequently asked questions about that. The reason this is something that made our look back as far as trying to identify some things is we've had several banks that are having trouble now specifically looking back and going, okay, why'd we do what we did with PPP loans? And if you recall, the guidance that came out relative to these questions and answers about customer due diligence was a bit confusing with respect to new customers and existing customers. And it kind of paints this, well, you don't have to do anything if they're existing, but you have to throw the whole thing at them if they're new customers. And then even that's a little bit murky because not having to do something with existing customers, well, your program says you still are supposed to. So make sure your team ironed out how you applied this guidance in relation to your program, remembering that this was all about trying to get money in the hands of businesses that were struggling during and continue to struggle in this pandemic. Page number 4, letter J. So this is a Reg E interpretive rule, and a lot about a little here, folks. In fact, I struggled with whether we should even include it, and I chose to just because I think there's some confusion here about what this was about. It's about pandemic relief payments that are electronically provided to consumers. Can the government require the consumer to have an account at a specific institution? The answer is yes, in light of this guidance, because pandemic relief payments that meet certain criteria, which most do, are not subject to Reg E's prohibition on requiring an account in order to receive a relief payment. And so that's what this is all about. And once you go, I don't care, move on. So I will. Let's go to letter K. Revised Examination Manual for Bank Secrecy Act AML. This has been a work in progress. In fact, if you read that second paragraph, you're going to find out it states that this has been a long time coming. The key to this is it wasn't supposed to be anything new under the sun. What it was taking the guidance that had come out since the last examination manual and putting it all in one nice, neat place. Examinations are generally an open book test, and BSAML is no different. We have a new open book from which to study from, but the study note shouldn't be new. Okay, it's just a new one-stop shop for all the latest, greatest. Now, have some things come out since this examination manual was put in front of us, this updated version? Sure they have. And so someday there'll have to be another new one again. And that's what letter K is about. Let's go to letter L, HMDA. So thresholds changed. If you're not a HMDA bank, or if you weren't a HMDA bank coming into the year, this is a non-event for you. But if you were a HMDA bank entering in 2020, they made a change earlier this year that went into effect July 1st of 2020. They increased the closed-end threshold to 100. They also at the same time changed the open-end threshold from 100 to 200, and it's January 1st, 2022. There's a typo on your screen as well as in your books. Do me a favor, pick up your pen. Next to L2, the effective date underneath the paragraph needs to read January 1, 2022 for open-end credit. That's when that threshold changes. So it changes for that whole calendar year. The big one for right now, 2020, as we look back, is that going from 25 to 100 for closed end. We had a lot of HMDA banks that said, excuse me, we're done here. And that was a good thing because it opened up some resources, some time, some energy to put towards some other things. The bottom of page 5, really a non-event, I think, but just to bring it to your attention, they put together a rule that said, here's the method we're using to come up with rural and underserved for these two things in truth and lending, or this thing in truth and lending, and that is under the ability to pay qualified mortgage HPML rules, and then there's a Home Mortgage Disclosure Act area for that as well. So basically, they're just trying to be transparent and say, this is how we come up with this. Nothing you need to do in order as it relates to that item. Let's go to number 6 or page 6, letter N. So another interpretive rule. So rules are out there and they're providing their official, right, formal interpretation of them. This is the CFPB. This one's simple. When you take TRID and change circumstances and right of rescission, okay, both Truth in Lending Act requirements, what they've said is specifically and matter of fact that the COVID-19 experience that we're all living through, that experience in and of itself could be a bona fide personal financial emergency for which to waive right of rescission. Now, you still have to follow the right of rescission rules. It's also a changed circumstance. You still need to follow the changed circumstance rules. So the COVID-19 pandemic does fit that bill for both of those items. You do have documentation requirements that you need to make sure are put together and can be located in those files. Letter O, the Reg D debit limitations. Taken a lot of calls on this one, and for whatever reason, there's been a lot of confusion. I just taught this at a state banking association again last week, and it's something specifically that's being asked for. I'm going to try to oversimplify it again here. The Federal Reserve owned the rights to oversee this, and then it applies to everyone. But basically, they said after the pandemic hit that we're just going to wipe this thing clear. The confusion set in because of what it was called. It was put together and billed as an interim final rule. Everybody immediately thought, oh, it's just temporary. They're going to eliminate these limitations, but only temporarily. That's not true. In fact, they've put out guidance since to dispel that myth. But the reason that the confusion was out there in the first place is because when this thing hit the Federal Register, there was actually 2 different Reg D changes that were in that same Federal Register. One was the elimination of these debt limitations, which is forever. The other was something else to do with Reg D, but it was in fact temporary. In fact, it was September of 2020 that it was supposed to go away, and it did. But this debit limitations that we're talking about, it's gone. The interim rule label just means that they can make it effective immediately, and the comment period comes after, instead of the comment period coming and then it becoming final. It's just a different way they go about it in order to have it take effect right away. So it's not temporary, it's for the long haul. Number 2, there's no requirement any longer to monitor. So you could all stop monitoring immediately. Now you could still have a voluntary limitation. As far as voluntary, what I mean is you could have your own internal standards, but you don't need to monitor and send letters. Okay? But you can voluntarily have limitations if you'd like them. If you strip away your limitations, there's no required notification element. However, it might be good customer service to do so. So hopefully that helps out some of you that have been struggling with that and what to do. If you want to keep your limits, fine, you can do that, but there's no need to monitor them from a following up and changing accounts or closing accounts. You don't have to do that anymore. Okay, or you could simply strip them away and keep them as is. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, well, do they cease being savings accounts? Not as long as you keep the 7-day reservation of right to withdraw, notification of right to withdraw. As long as you keep that 7-day notification, which you don't have to have them actually do, you just have to reserve that right, that keeps them in the savings account realm. Page number 7, letter P. The CFPB put out some Reg B Equal Credit Opportunity Act guidance with respect to the appraisal notice and free copy rule. Now, I'm not going to go through each one of these today, but this is good reading material. If you're a compliance person to match up with how you're doing things in your organization, I would make certain that you've gone through and read these short little guidance documents. There's not a lot to them, but there's some good information here, maybe for you as the compliance professional, or maybe, like, for example, the delay and timing fact sheet. There's some examples in there that maybe your loan officers would benefit from, as well as the frequently asked questions. So it's a good resource document. Letter Q. This is the CFPB's annual fair lending report. If you're a compliance officer, if you're in charge of fair lending in your organizations, this is annual must-read material. Fair lending is always going to be at the top of the list as far as hot topics consistently. And so make sure you know what's been observed in the last 12 months as it relates to fair lending practices. Now, yes, this is at the CFPB level, But if it's being seen there, it's likely being seen in other areas as well, smaller institutions, and likely your prudential regulators are seeing some of the same things. So good reading material to stay up to speed on. There's also some things in there that you can take to management and the board of directors for that 10,000-foot update on fair lending. And you do that, make sure you get it on your board agendas and we get it recorded in the minutes so that you can get credit for that exchange of information, that flow of information from compliance to management and the board. And that all is going to work out better for you in the long run when you get measured on your compliance management systems, that CMS measuring stick that gets applied to your organization. The bottom of page 7, letter R, has to do with PPP loans yet again. This is in relation to Reg B. Lots of good adverse action notice elements here. Now, PPP is kind of come and gone, so this is more of a retroactive look, or a retrospective. We're looking back and saying, okay, did we do things correctly? Is there anything we need to clean up? Or do we need to own up that we made some mistakes here, do kind of a memo to the file that says, all right, we made a mistake, there's nothing we do, but we're aware of it. And if we get asked about it, we'll at least have documentation of what we've observed. Hey, I know PPP happened fast and furious, and likely mistakes were made. Hey, this was to help kind of clear up some of the marching orders as it related to compliance requirements and Reg B in relation to those transactions. Let's go to page number 8. Remittance transfer rule. This is a Reg E thing. This has to do with electronic transfers to foreign countries. There's a threshold. They moved that threshold to 500 or fewer. This took effect July 21st. So it's electronic funds transfers that are initiated here and sent to a foreign country. When you exceed 500 during a specific time frame, and then they give you a window to comply after that, you have to start making additional disclosures. There's estimates involved. Make certain that you're tracking that 500 number if it's something you get close to. If you're over it and you just have to do this, hopefully it's something you've already implemented. If it's something that, gosh, we've never gone above 500 or we've gone close, that's something you should be tracking then. And so that might be something you need to go and read up on, or maybe take some more extensive training on to ensure that your organization's meeting the requirements in that area. Letter T, this is a frequently asked question document the CFPB put out on payments and deposit regulations in general. I wrote down that it had to do a lot with change in terms and subsequent notifications in relationship to deposit regulations. So if you were looking at changing terms because of things occurring during the pandemic, waiving this, waiving that, modifying your account agreements, sometimes you can't just do that. Sometimes you can do it, it requires an advance notice. Sometimes it requires a follow-up notice. This is reminding you of those responsibilities to those regulations. Letter U is the OCC's CRA rule. Now, this is kind of interesting because you're going to hear about CRA a little bit later on as well. The OCC came out with their own version. The different regulatory agencies had been kind of collectively looking at doing this. They have all kind of spun out on their own now. And so the OCC, they did their own thing. They were first to the party. They made some changes. If you're OCC regulated, make sure you understand the different effective dates there. You'll see the bottom of page 8. There's 3 different phases that this gets implemented in as it relates to this rule. Let's go to page 9. Page 9, letter V, the Consumer Handbook on Adjustable Rate Mortgages was updated this year. If you had pre-printed stock, you were allowed to use that up. But if you had just been printing it off from a computer or providing electronically, you had to begin using this new version of the Consumer Handbook on Adjustable Rate Mortgages as of 6/4/20 when that came out. That was something you needed to update and move to. You could use up pre-printed stock. Otherwise, you had to move directly to this new version with the updated materials there. A lot of it having to do with what we're going to bring into the discussion next, and that is the LIBOR transition. Hey, LIBOR is going to go away. Rest in peace, like you see on the screen there. It's going to disappear, and you have to do something with that. Okay, if you have transactions that are tied to the LIBOR, okay, they've proposed changes to this. Okay, you're going to see a final rule here in the future on how to handle that transition from LIBOR to whatever we're going to go to beyond that. Letter X, TRID and title insurance. Long been a pain in likely your behind as well as the industry's behind. The Dodd-Frank Act law sets forth the calculation that's required to be used to come up with title insurance for TRID loans. Okay, it is what it is. We need to be following that. Those are the three ingredients you see on the screen. This was a long time coming. This fact sheet includes several different examples, okay, with scenarios on how to come up with the correct number for TRID and title insurance. So make sure your teams that do TRID, that have to comply with that rule, are aware and that we're doing these calculations this way, or that at the very least you have it as a reference when the seller pays a portion of title insurance, or there's a negative title insurance number. All of those things are addressed in this guidance here. So make sure that you've taken account of that and ensure that your teams are doing that correctly. Letter Y is another TRID FAQ, and this is another one that it's been this way the whole time. This is not new. They just now have a Q&A that black and white hits us and says, hey, you got to do it this way. Has to do with seller paid charges. On page 2 of the borrower's version of the closing disclosure, there are two borrower paid columns. I'm sorry, two seller paid columns. So closing disclosure, page 2, there's two seller paid columns. When there's a seller involved, any and all seller paid charges, not just charges the seller's paying on behalf of the borrower, but also those charges that are specific to the seller only, must be disclosed in the borrower's version of the form. This Q&A hits that home yet again. It's been discussed over and over and over again that this needs to be done, but now we have a new Q&A that once again says, hey, you got to be doing it this way. Make sure your teams are aware of that and you're following that requirement. It's not guidance, that's a requirement. The last thing on the bottom of page number 9 has to do with that consumer reporting and COVID-19. This directly intersects with the CARES Act and how you are to report information to credit bureaus with those that are taking advantage of loss mitigation and accommodation loans that you're making to them for consumer real estate mortgages. Make sure you're reporting in accordance with the law that is the CARES Act and the guidance that was put out on its behalf. There was no regulation that was put in place to implement that section of the CARES Act. It was just law and you needed to start doing it this way. So servicing of mortgage loans is something that should be aware. Your mortgage servicing department should be aware of this, these FAQs at the bottom of the page. Let's go to page number 10. On page 10, we have the qualified mortgage and this patch to proposal thing. So here, let me explain what's going on. Number 1, underneath AA, the general QM, sometimes referenced as the standard QM. This is the one that has the 43% back-in debt ratio. It also has the Appendix Q reference, okay, which means it's the one that most of you avoid. Why do you avoid it? Because there's another QM that you likely use for, especially in secondary market loans. It's the temporary QM. Okay? The temporary QM is widely used. The problem, it has an expiration date. It goes away January of 2021. Long story short, here's what they're doing. They have proposed to revise the standard QM to work better for the industry. And so they want it to be more widely used, and eventually it will replace the temporary QM to some degree. They know that because of the widespread use of the temporary QM, they can't just have it die in January when they don't have an alternative yet to be put into use. So what they've done is they're going to temporarily extend the temporary QM beyond January of 2021 to coincide with the time that it's going to take to put together a revised version of the standard QM. Once the standard QM is finalized, the temporary QM will die and the industry will be changed to some degree. Stay tuned for that. That's a bigger deal coming in the next year or so as it relates to compliance implementation. When that happens, it's going to shake up the industry a little bit just because it's different. Okay, and it's going to require some training, some monitoring, some testing, et cetera. The very bottom of page number 10, we've got loss mitigation options. They came out with an interim final rule specific with accommodations and COVID-19 with different criteria. Make sure if you are a large servicer that you're aware of this. Small servicers, you do not need to be following this guidance to the letter. Good to be aware of it, but not something you have to follow. Top of page number 11, letter CC. The HMDA data was released in June of 2024, or June of 2020 for the 2019 calendar year. Here's what I wrote. Maybe you want to write this down too. Review it. Find out what it says your story is. So review the information to determine the story it tells about you, and then take it to management. The key is no surprises. So review it. What's the story? And then make sure management is aware of what that story is about your organization. Letter DD. Another thing that's coming is an updated frequently asked question bank for flood insurance. This has also been a long time coming. Now, it's been revised before, but they basically took the whole thing and did major revisions to some things, minor revision to some others, and added some new things. This thing's going to get finalized again in the coming months. Make sure your teams are prepared for that to roll those things out. There's some things in there like, probably the most notable is that when you have a flood zone discrepancy between your determination and what the insurance company states or what the policy says, you no longer are going to bear the responsibility to get that corrected. If there's a discrepancy, you're supposed to just note it and move on. You don't have to correct the issue. I like that they're taking that burden away from banks. Okay, that's one of the good things that are going to come out of that, amongst just new updated guidance, which the industry needs. Letter EE, the OCC UDAP handbook. Now, I know it says OCC there, but my opinion, and I'm sure my teammates could come in and chime in on this as well, that is the current best place to get UDAP guidance. So even if you're not OCC regulated, if you want to say, gosh, is our team up to speed with the latest, greatest on what's unfair, deceptive, or abusive, and the red flags and the examples of all those things, this is the place to go. Even if you're not OCC regulated, this is must-read material for any compliance officer and their teams. Okay, they give a lot of examples and red flags. Make sure that you get your hands on this. Hey, now there's likely something else that'll come out down the road, but right now, this is the latest, greatest. Okay, regardless of who you're regulated by. And I mentioned fair lending earlier. At the top of the list of things that are most challenging, this is right there too. UDAP is constantly going to be something that you're going to have to manage. And so make sure that you're up to speed with the latest guidance documents is, to me, just a must. Let's go to page 12. Letter FF is the FinCEN hemp guidance. So if you're banking hemp, if you're thinking about getting into that, you need to stay up to speed with the guidance that comes down from FinCEN. They came out with some stuff late 2019 that many of you probably got your hands on in January of this year. This is the follow-up to that. Make sure you're following the guidance with respect to BSA, AML, and suspicious activity, the CDD guidance, the CIP rules, all that stuff here. This is something you need to make sure that you've implemented relative to your policy and probably more so your procedures as it relates to your hemp customers or potential hemp customers. Letter GG is the Reg E opt-in rule review. So the one-time debit and ATM transaction opt-in for overdrafts under Reg E, when it came out and institutions had to decide whether to do it or not, that rule came with an automatic built-in review down the road. That review has been completed by the CFPB. They completed that, and they've concluded at the current time, they're going to leave the Reg E one-time debit and ATM overdraft opt-in as is with no changes. Now, they do reserve the right to review it again down the road, but it won't be required like it was this time under the actual law that produced it. Okay, that law, that regulation required this review. They did it, no changes. Now, if you remember, they had previously put out some revised opt-in disclosures. To my knowledge, there's no changes right now. Doesn't mean there couldn't be down the road, because that form's been challenged in a couple of court cases, and that's a little concerning for our industry. But as of now, that model form is not changing. Okay, stay tuned. Letter HH, Reg CC. So this is a change you knew was coming. It was effective July 1st of 2020. What happened was the case-by-case upfront availability went from 200 to 225, and the large deposit exception delay went from 5,000 to 5,525. So they're not as easily to remember numbers, but those are changes, and then they're going to change in the future. That regulation is now going to allow for them to change as an index changes every so often. I don't remember off the top of my head, but those will change again down the road. Letter II, the HPML escrow exemption proposal. So you're going to hear this one a couple times here, and then when we get to looking ahead, they have proposed what this is going to change. Now, this is part of the Economic Growth and Recovery Relief Act that Donald Trump signed, a couple years ago now, and it was supposed to provide economic relief. Well, that final rule still isn't here yet. Now, it will be. Probably the important information here that you need to know is this. If you already have the capacity and the capability to escrow, and you've got the systems in place, you're not going to probably be able to be exempt. This exemption is being rewritten to allow, yet again, some banks that are only escrowing for HPMLs and nothing else to drop out if they meet the criteria. And you can read some of that criteria for yourself in that paragraph. But if you're a bank that's already full on escrowing beyond HPMLs, there's no relief for you here. You're not going to be able to drop out of the picture as it relates to escrow accounts and HPMLs. Let's go to letter JJ on page 13. The payday and vehicles high cost installment rule that the CFPB put out was put through quite a challenge. And at the end of the day, they had to revoke parts of the rule that they put out. That's what this is all about. So if you're into that sort of lending, make sure your teams have dotted the I's and crossed the T's here. Section KK. This has to do with HMDA yet again. They put out some more questions and answers. This one really didn't do us a ton of good. What they said is certain fields like debt to income, collateral loan to value, property value, which some of those are just large filer fields anyway. What they've said is if you have that data but didn't claim it to be relied upon in whole to make your credit decision, you still have to report that data if you put it together, even if it was what they say a dispositive factor. In other words, you have it, it's there, but you maybe just kind of sort of relied on it, but not very much. You still have to report that data. That's what it comes down to. Letter LL. After they did the two proposals to extend the temporary QM and rework the standard, they also dreamt up another proposal for a new seasoned QM. Basically, this would be a 36-month loan that stays on your books and meets certain criteria with respect to delinquencies and things like that, and it would create yet another QM category. Now, it doesn't change the QMs for balloons. It doesn't change the portfolio QM. It'd be a new version of QM that you'd have at your disposal. We'll wait and see what the final version looks like. Let's go to page 14. FinCEN's statement on enforcement of the Bank Secrecy Act. This is about transparency and about them telling you the framework they're going to use and how they're going to decide what to do when there are violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. That's in a nutshell what this is. Hey, they had a new director come along. There's new memos flying out. This is about transparency. Now, that said, I'm going to get to the bottom of the page, and there may be some changes in the air. Okay, we'll come to that in a moment. Letter NN. So the CFPB's 1071 plan. What's 1071? The Dodd-Frank Act has a goodie that's not yet been doled out to everybody. Okay, there's a law that says that banks eventually are going to have to collect information for small businesses as well as those that are women and minority owned. And then you're going to have to report it just like HMDA data. Well, it's been a long time coming, and this is going to be a rather big thing when it does come. The good news is what they're telling us is it's going to be implemented over time. It's not something they're just going to flip the switch and overnight you're going to have to do this. Okay, I've heard 2-year process. Here's what you need to know very early on yet. Okay, all they're doing is casting a vision right now. Then they're going to have some meetings. Then they'll do a proposal. Then there'll come a final rule, and then there'll be implementation. What you need to do, though, is give a 10,000-foot view approach to your management teams and your boards that says, hey, this thing's coming, and it's going to be kind of a big deal, and it's going to be a big-time shakeup for your commercial lending staff. Because right now, they may have to do HMDA if you're a HMDA bank. And there's not probably a ton of HMDA transactions. But if you think about small business loans, as well as those are women and minority owned, and having to collect a bunch of data that's got to be dang near perfect, like HMDA data, and then report that, this has opened up a big can of worms from a compliance standpoint. And there's going to be some exemptions. They're going to carve some banks out. There's a lot of that discussion going on right now, but this is something you need to make management teams aware of. because it's going to occur in an area of your bank where not a lot of compliance happens, not because they don't want to comply, but because there's just not a lot of rules and regulations that are attributed directly towards commercial lenders. This one is crosshairs right on them, and it's going to be a big deal. Make sure you're preparing your teams for that. We'll also, as this thing starts to roll out, have training, put things together to help you and your teams out. I mentioned this was going to come at the top of the page. FinCEN put out some information saying that they're going to look to enhance BSA AML programs. My reading between the lines here is they're going to put some, what I wrote down, enhance, there's going to be an expectation, I think, that there will be enhanced BSA AML programs. So you're here at good, they're going to expect you to move to great. Hey, that bar is going to go higher with respect to your responsibilities in BSA AML. That's my take as I read through the information that was put out. So another thing to take to management teams that says, all right, we have a BSA AML program, it's pretty good. Don't be shocked if down the road the regulatory agencies put something out that raises the bar on us yet again to help fight, defend our country against terrorism and money laundering and trafficking and drugs and all that nasty stuff that's out there with the bad guys learning how to lie, cheat, and steal better every day of the year. We need to stay ahead of that. We're a step or two behind, and we'll always be a little behind because of the new ways to lie, cheat, and steal, but we need to make sure we keep that gap close, and that's really what that's aimed at doing. Let's go to page number 15. Letter PP, I mentioned the OCC's version earlier. Here's the Federal Reserve's version. If you're a Fed bank, they're looking to modernize your CRA rules for that you're all having to comply with. Make sure that your teams are aware of that and stay tuned about what's to come in that area. Letter QQ, Diane was actually the one on our team that decided to volunteer and take a look at this. And so I got her recap. This is the CFPB's required review of the TRID rule, also built into the law and the regulation when TRID was pushed out. I got to be honest, there's not a lot here. There's some data in here that doesn't make a lot of sense because of when it was taken right after the TRID rule went into effect. And I have yet to see that this is worth a lot of your time in reading. And so I wouldn't probably waste your time too much trying to dig real deep into this because the data is a bit dated. We've all gotten better at TRID, and I think it's the report reads that things weren't good right away and that the confusion may have been with this or that, but we're in a completely different world now. So I'm not sure it's relevant, even though it's some new information. Maybe you read it and find something else out, but I can tell you our team didn't get a lot out of this. Page 15, letter RR, RESPA Section 8 FAQs, long overdue. This is some great information that you need to make sure that your consumer, residential, real estate teams have in their possession. Okay? You need to know where the lines have been drawn in the sand or where there appears to be a line, and it may be blurry because some of it is with RESPA Section 8. Teeny tiny regulation. I was having this discussion. How some of them are this long and some of them are this short, and basically came back to, this is one of them, RESPA Section 8. This reg is so skinny with not a lot of detail. It needs to be rewritten. Now, these Q&As come along and they help some of that out, but we still need some more. There's some, I read through them. I had teammates that read through them. If you know Kevin Edwards, he's kind of our resident Section 8 guru. He read through them and went, great, they could do more. There could be some more here. So make sure your teams are aware of these, but know that there's still some gray areas out there. It didn't paint the picture totally crystal clear. Okay. That finishes out the year that was 2020, and I'm going, oh my gosh, and I wasn't kidding about seatbelts tight and ready to go. Lots going on. And so when your management teams, when your supervisor say, what have you been doing all year? There haven't been a lot of regulations. Haven't been a ton of regulations, but you know what? There's been a ton of guidance. A lot of, here's how you handle this. Here's what you do there, here, everywhere. And so you've had a lot to stay on top of. A lot of dissemination of information going on in 2020. Okay, we weren't sitting around doing nothing, that's for sure. So now let's cast that vision. What's up on the horizon? Like I said, it's a little murky. We've got an election in a week, and that's going to paint, whatever the picture is going to be, depending on the outcome there. But here's some things we do know. Hey, let's take a look at page 16. I would make sure that you take a 10,000-foot update to your management teams on some of these items. First off, letter A, we've already talked about this. Dodd-Frank Act 1071, it's the big kahuna coming. Okay, it's the next big thing as far as when you get handed a regulation and you've got to do some change management on a large scale from an implementation standpoint. If this thing doesn't carve your bank out, and make you exempt, this is a big deal. Make sure management is aware of that and that there will need to be resources. And we hashed that over a couple pages ago. This PACE Act financing, it's a truth in lending thing. It has to do with property assessed clean energy programs. It's been a long time coming as well. It was part of that economic growth and relief act that came out a few years past. We're still looking for a proposal here. They did an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. So my thing here is all of this in letter B, there's the proposal coming at some point. Stay tuned. Page number 17, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act rule. This is a final rule that's coming. They're going to be issuing a final rule on this. If you collect the debts for a third party, so you can collect your own and not have to be subject to this rule. If you collect someone else's debts, a third party's debts, that's what brings the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act to the table. Now, this rule, the proposal when it came out, had some interesting things in it that may go beyond collecting the debts of a third party. So when this thing hits, stay tuned. There's going to be some things to learn and try to glean from this. Even if it's not directly subject to you, there may be some things that fall into that UDAP camp with respect to collecting your own debts. So the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act says don't do this. Maybe we shouldn't do that even though we're not subject to the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, because maybe it's a UDAP thing. So some considerations like that, some things to be learned. Don't just look the other way on that one. HPML escrow account exemption, we mentioned that earlier. That's going to be, we're going to get a proposal on that. We don't yet have the, I'm sorry, yeah, we're going to, let's see, let me make sure I got this right. So many things here today. There is, and Diane, maybe you can help me out. Did the proposal already come out? Yeah, the proposal came out in July. We're going to see a final rule. So this is from the CFPB's agenda. We're going to see that final rule come in the coming year. Again, some of you that you're not going to get out if you already have the capacity to escrow with your systems because you're doing things beyond HPML loans. Here's another big one that, I don't know, I shouldn't say big. I'm not sure what to take here. They are going to look, the CFPB is going to look at HMDA. Okay? They rolled out new HMDA a few years back. We're complying with it. And they're going to take a look and they have to say, all right, did we overshoot on some things? Do we need to reconsider some of the requirements that we put into play? So it could be interesting to see how this thing looks. It's in a proposed rule format right now. I've heard nothing else about this. It's just, to me, going to be an interesting look to see, all right, are they going to take anything away? Are they going to say they went too far in certain areas? Are they going to modify areas? Okay, we'll see what happens here. But if you're a HMDA bank, there's changes in the air likely. Okay, whether they're big ones or not remains to be seen. Letter F, there will be a qualified mortgage final rule. This is going to be another big thing that's coming. Won't be as big as the Dodd-Frank Act 1071 collection and reporting, but they're going to change your standard QM. There's going to be a new version of it. It's going to be more widely used because the temporary QM is going to be allowed to die, and they're not, to my knowledge, going to try to revive that one more time. Okay, it's supposed to die in January. They're going to extend it until they can fix the standard QM to be more widely used. They've come out with the proposal for the season QM. Okay, QM and the area that applies to is going to change in the coming year. Okay, they probably aren't huge changes though, but changes nonetheless. Page 19, LIBOR. There's going to be a final rule coming to transition that going away as well. We talked about that earlier. Letter H is guidance or law and regulation. There's been a couple different things that have come out, and they're kind of interesting. What it says is essentially guidance is not law and or regulation. Well, that's easy enough to state that. But we have a thing called unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. And a lot of our guidance is geared toward, hey, don't do this because it could be grounds, or steer clear here because it could be grounds for unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. And we said earlier, that's at the top of the list of things that are concerning in compliance. Fair lending, that, BSA, ML, they're all right there at the top as far as big things that keep us awake at night. So while it's easy enough to say, guidance doesn't carry the same weight as regulation. Yeah, but guidance can lead to regulation, especially where there are gray areas in the regulation. So be careful how you use that that was put out on the rule of guidance. Yes, it does state that guidance doesn't carry the same weight, but sometimes it can be the dot that connects to the regulatory dot that can cause a problem for you. I'd love to have more of a discussion on that with you, but with the time we have here, I have a few more things, and then I do want to hear about some of the questions you have. And so you've got a few coming in. If you've got a question, go ahead and get that in. Diane's receiving those, and we'll close out here a couple things and get to those. The Card Act. Some of you do offer credit cards. The Card Act's going to be reviewed. That's going to be an interesting thing as well. They rewrote all those rules several years back. They're going to take a look at them again and see if there's any changes that need to be made, adjustments that need to be made. I'm waiting for the day they say that they're going to adjust open-end credit for like home equity lines of credit. I think that change is coming, and eventually there will be disclosures that we all have to learn to distribute and use there. Much like TRID for closed end, I think that day is coming where they'll have TRID-like rules for home equity lines. That's not what this is about, but something to put on your long-term agenda for the CFPB. Letter J, abusive acts or practices. We started with that. They put out the framework for the term abusive. Here they're reserving the right to make changes and provide possible rulemaking and or future statements about how they plan to apply the term abusive in the field. Remember, it doesn't have the same bar as unfair and deceptive. Unfair and deceptive each have 3 criteria that have to be prevalent in order for it to be one of those 2 items, unfair or deceptive. Abusive just has an either or. It's either got to be this or that. So a much lower bar. And so make sure you understand how that can be applied in compliance. All right, page 21, our last 3 items, then we're going to take your questions. Originator compensation is on the CFPB's to-do list to take a look at that. That is long-term, you'll note, long-term action item. So ways out on that one. But the Truth in Lending Act originator compensation rules are probably looking at a bit of an overhaul at some point. Letter L, e-sign and Truth in Lending specifically are looking at some updates down the road. So that's something that's on their long-term agenda. I don't think that's a major. We've had a lot of e-sign intersections with the COVID-19 impact and the lack of being able to meet in person. And for the most part, I think that's going pretty well. We don't have a lot of calls or a lot of errors that we're seeing there, but they're looking to have some more regulatory insight in that area. And then the last thing is artificial intelligence. This has to do with using non-traditional methods to do underwriting and pricing and try to get loans and credit into borrowers' hands. There's a risk there. And so that's a discussion that's not only happened at the CFPB level, but also at the congressional level. With that, we've hit, I want to say when I counted this, like 44 or 46 items. I wrote the number down. I don't have it at my head, but that was about 45 minutes, about a minute an item there. You've got a to-do list. You've got some things to go, okay, what do we have to go back and make sure we dotted the I and crossed the T on? What do we need to get in management's hands as far as information to know what we have ahead of us and the things that we're still working on? And so hopefully this is something that you can use as a value moving forward. And we'll plan to come back and do this again next year. We've done it several years in a row now. A lot of great feedback from all of you. I'm hoping it is something that you value and can utilize to set up what you're doing moving forward, as well as to ensure what you've done in the previous 9 months, 10 months of the year, that you've checked your boxes, dotted your I's, crossed your T's. With that, I'm going to invite my teammate Diane to come in, and we've got about 6 or 7 minutes here. Let's take some questions from the field, Diane, and see if we can get them some plain English solutions.
Okay, we will start with the Bank Secrecy Act.
Okay.
Our auditors would like us to update our BSA policy to consider hemp-related businesses. Where would I find resources to add this, and how in-depth should I go?
Well, I think first off, your board needs to, and I'm going to be careful with the word policy, your board needs to say, we're willing to accept hemp-related business from a risk appetite standpoint. And that may or may not be a policy statement. But as far as the guidance that's been put out there and what you should do, that should all be procedural. And so if you're going to bank hemp customers, you should probably review the guidance. You should review the guidance and then work the guidance into the procedures that you're going to roll out that is the roadmap for how you're going to handle those customers on the front line.
On the TRID FAQs, can you explain the difference between paid versus absorbed costs?
Sure. My short little elevator pitch goes like this. If you're just going to waive the appraisal fee, or I negotiate with you to pay for the credit report fee on this transaction or that transaction, and they're just kind of here and there things, that's absorbed. If you have a product that you say is no cost or partial no cost, and you advertise it that way, or it's presented that way to the borrower, either because they get a credit based on the rate to offset the fees, or it's simply a credit to offset the fees that has nothing to do with the rate. Okay, those are no cost and partial no cost transactions. You need to be fully transparent there, as opposed to the absorbed, where I'm just choosing to waive a fee here or there.
Okay, we'll go to the Reg D changes. Would our truth in savings disclosures need to be updated if we eliminate the transfer restrictions?
If you eliminate the transfer restrictions going forward, you should take those limitations off your truth in savings disclosure. You would not be required to do a notification, though, to your current customers.
Okay, did you say that we can keep those limits in place but no longer need to monitor or send letters or close accounts if they exceed those limits?
Correct. And let me put it this way. Some of you may choose to keep those limitations so that you can charge a service charge when they exceed. That's okay. Okay, that would need to be disclosed in your truth and savings disclosures, and it likely has been and will continue to be going forward. Do you need to monitor, though, anymore? No, you probably can just flip a switch on your system that says charge on the 7th transaction and whatever your disclosed service charge is, but you no longer have to monitor accounts to convert them if they exceed 3 times in a rolling 12 months or whatever those things used to be. I've actually flushed them a long time ago, but that monitoring doesn't need to happen anymore. The converting of accounts doesn't need to happen anymore. If you want limitations, it's likely solely so that you can charge a service charge when somebody exceeds.
Okay, we'll take one on HMDA. If we are no longer a HMDA bank, is it necessary for us to continue to pay for an LEI number?
I'm going to say no, you wouldn't need one off the top of my head. Maybe there's some other reason you should have them, because I know some banks had them before they needed them for some other reason. I heard that. If it's possible you could be a HMDA bank again in a year or two because of data, it was just a down year for you, then you probably wouldn't want to get rid of it. But can you think of anything, Diane?
No, I'm with you that I
Okay.
do believe some had it for whatever reason before HMDA,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure why. So back to Reg D, do you believe there are potential UDAP concerns if savings account customers are not notified if we remove the limits?
I don't think so. Our team, Diane and I and other teammates, we talked about this. No, I don't think so. And the Fed was, I want to say there was a Q&A, or this was something that was discussed when this was rolled out. So no, I don't believe it's UDAP.
Okay. Someone's asking, what banks are exempt from Section 1071?
I knew somebody would ask that. I don't know yet. That's my answer, but let me give you what they're thinking. This is fun. I get excited about new regulations, not because of what you all have to do, but just something new and shiny to look at, right? All right, and you're going, he's nuts. I know I am. Weird. So here's the deal. They're looking from a financial institution coverage standpoint. This is the way they're looking at it, and this real high. You can go read this stuff, but they're looking at possibly doing a loan volume threshold, and they're looking at 3 potential options having to do with loan originations and dollar amounts of originations, possibly even a combination of that. That's one option of 3 options they're looking at. They're also looking at possibly just an asset threshold or a combined asset threshold and loan volume. So the answer to that question is not easy, but they are looking at drawing those lines using loan volume and assets somehow, some way. They did give some examples. I think their threshold for assets is too low, my opinion, but we'll see where things shake out.
Okay, this one is on fair lending. What type of fair lending analysis do you feel an institution needs to do regarding PPP loans to prepare for future exams?
Okay, so PPP loans. I mean, you need to make sure that you didn't. I mean, there was only one type of loan. It was a 1% loan with this term, it was the same for everybody. So terms and conditions shouldn't matter. It really should be whether or not you were turning people away at the time of application, or you had lags, or you were preventing. I mean, if we look at the time from application to origination, I mean, some of those things that have traditionally been looked at in other types of lending scenarios would be things to look at. But the terms of the loan, they should all be the same. So it would really be who did or who didn't get them versus who did, and how long it took it to get processed. That's what I would look specifically at. Okay, the people you turned away, the people that didn't get it, and how long it took people to get their funds from application to origination. Diane, I see that we are at the top of the hour, and I know everybody out there is busy. And so I got a couple closing things before we send everybody on their way. First off, on behalf of our team, thanks for stopping by for this look back at this interesting year that we've had in 2020, and kind of the here's what's up on the horizon. We don't know exactly what that future holds, but there's going to be changes. That's a guarantee, one way or another. So make sure you prepare your teams for that moving forward. In order to help you with questions again down the road, first off, we provide ongoing consultation. If you caught that video at the beginning of the program, that's something we do. If you would like to know more information about how to ask questions and get consultation moving down the road, we can help you out with that. Pick up the phone and we can figure out how to partner with one another. That said, we do provide 3 other forums every year. They are each a Q&A forum, much like the Q&As that we did here in the last 10 minutes, except that these 3 forums, the whole hour is your questions and our plain English answers to help solve your problems. The next version is in January of 2021 on the 26th. You can go out and get registered for that already. It's already available out in our store. We'd love to have you get your team there. And you can start immediately submitting your questions to be considered for inclusion in that 1-hour lending compliance Q&A. With that, once again, on behalf of Diane, myself, the entire Bankers Compliance Consulting team, thanks for stopping by today. Couple of things on your way out the door. First off, there's a survey, 5 short questions. We'd love to get some feedback on how we did today to continue to meet your compliance challenges and helping you out with that, partnering with your organization. Please take a few moments and fill out that survey. The recording for today's program, give us 2 weeks to turn that around. We often turn it around faster, but we just give that disclaimer. If you need to go back and listen to it again, it's there for your viewing pleasure, your audio pleasure again down the road. If you need to take it to your board, to management, certain segments of it, please feel free to do that. We want to try to help make your job, your lives easier when it comes to regulatory compliance. With that, we're going to send you all on your way and back to what you all do best. That's serving your customers. We'll see you again soon.